It was supposed to be just another evening, calm and uneventful, with a typical political talk show on air. But what transpired that night would leave the entire room, and the audience watching at home, completely stunned. The setting was meant for light conversation and celebrity banter, but things took a dark turn when Barron Trump, the youngest son of the former president, was unexpectedly thrust into the spotlight. No one could have predicted the storm that would break loose on this seemingly innocent evening. The air was thick with tension as Barron, who rarely sought the public eye, walked into the room. Known for his quiet, reserved demeanor and absence from the media frenzy that followed his famous family, Barron was about to face something no one could have prepared him for. As he sat down, the talk show host, famous for his liberal stance, smiled mockingly, clearly eager to stir the pot. The audience was buzzing, anticipating what would come next. "So, Barron, how does it feel to be the son of a man who changed the world, for better or worse?" the host sneered. The sharpness of the question cut through the air like a blade, a calculated jab meant to provoke. It wasn't just a question, it was a challenge, aimed at Barron's very identity, his family's legacy, and perhaps his own personal beliefs. The moment hung there, pregnant with expectation. Could Barron, only 18, navigate this minefield of public mockery? Would he buckle under pressure, or would he do something no one could foresee? The audience waited in anticipation. What they didn't know was that Barron Trump, the quiet young man, was about to make a response that would leave them breathless and forever change the way they saw him. In the face of mockery, would he cower? Or would he show a side of himself that no one ever thought possible? As the seconds ticked by, the tension only grew. This was not just another celebrity interview. This was something much bigger. And when Barron spoke, his words would send shockwaves through the media, leaving everyone, including the journalist, speechless. The studio fell eerily silent as the liberal talk show host, known for his sharp wit and biting commentary, fixed his gaze on Barron Trump. The question had been asked, but the real tension was just beginning to unfold. Barron, who had spent his childhood largely out of the spotlight, looked every bit the teenager, composed, quiet, yet unmistakably uncomfortable under the harsh lights of public scrutiny. This was not his world. Yet here he was, the son of a man who had sparked waves of controversy and had left a permanent mark on history. As the host, his voice dripping with sarcasm, probed further, he couldn't resist turning the knife. "It must be so tough, Barron, knowing that your father's decisions have shaped the nation in ways most would rather forget. Tell us, what do you think about the way people view your family now?" The question was a deliberate attempt to get Barron to slip up, to show the cracks in his facade. The audience murmured. Some exchanged glances, sensing the tension building. Others looked at Barron, waiting for him to respond. Would he crumble under the weight of such public humiliation? Would the quiet boy finally snap? But Barron didn't flinch. His eyes, though young, held a depth of calm that few expected from a teenager thrust into such a situation. With a steady breath, he met the host's gaze, refusing to be intimidated by the barrage of provocation. The entire room seemed to lean in, anticipating an answer. The liberal journalist, sensing his power in the moment, pressed further. "Do you even understand the criticism your father faced? Or are you just another puppet in the Trump legacy?" The host's voice was colder now, almost venomous, as if he were trying to draw out some form of rebellion, some slip of bitterness that would expose Barron's true feelings. For a moment, Barron said nothing. He allowed the silence to stretch on, the tension practically palpable in the room. Then, finally, he spoke. His voice was calm but firm, cutting through the noise of the studio like a blade. "I don't need to justify my family. We all make decisions. Some are right, some are wrong. But you're right about one thing. My father shaped this nation. And he made a choice to stand up, even when everyone else tried to tear him down. Maybe that's something you can learn from, instead of hiding behind mockery and cynicism." His words, though simple, held an undeniable weight. The studio fell dead silent. The crowd, which had been waiting for Barron to crack under the pressure, was now frozen in awe. It wasn't just that Barron had answered the question, it was how he had answered it. There was no anger in his voice, no defensiveness. He wasn't reacting to the provocation. Instead, he was responding with something far more profound, dignity. The host, taken aback, tried to recover. "You're so calm for someone your age. Does it ever bother you, Barron? The way your family is portrayed?" His tone was still mocking, but it was tinged with something else now, uncertainty. The question lingered in the air, but Barron, unfazed, took a moment before replying. "You think you know everything about my family. But you don't. You only see what the media shows you, and you assume that's the truth. I've learned that the world can be loud, and opinions can be harsh. But at the end of the day, I know who I am, and I know who my family is. That's what matters." Barron's words were simple, but the sincerity in his voice left an indelible mark on the room. There was no defensiveness, no attempt to win the conversation. He spoke not from a place of anger but from a quiet strength, the kind that only comes from true self-assurance. The host, visibly rattled, attempted to change the topic, but the damage was done. Barron had disarmed him, not with defiance or anger, but with the power of his calm, rational approach. The audience, who had expected a messy clash, now found themselves reflecting on Barron's words. For the first time, the crowd was not on the edge of their seats waiting for a scandal. They were stunned by Barron's maturity and the weight of his quiet wisdom. In the midst of the public spectacle, Barron had turned the tables in the most unexpected way. Instead of reacting with rage or defensiveness, he had met mockery with quiet strength. He had shown, in that brief moment, the power of dignity in a world that often seemed to lack it. His response was a masterclass in humility and wisdom, especially for someone so young. The host, visibly flustered, attempted to make another joke, but it fell flat. The audience, once waiting for the fireworks, now found themselves uncertain of what to say. The air was thick with a new kind of respect for Barron, a respect that had not been there before. But Barron wasn't done. His final words, delivered with the same quiet resolve, cut through the tension like a quiet, decisive victory. It's easy to mock people. It's hard to understand them. But in the end, it's understanding that brings people together, not mockery. With that, Barron leaned back, his calm demeanor the final blow to the host's narrative. The audience was left in stunned silence. Barron Trump, the young man who had been the subject of so much media scrutiny, had just delivered a lesson in grace under fire. No one could deny it. In that moment, Barron had won. And the liberal journalist, once so confident in his ability to provoke, was left speechless, the weight of Barron's words hanging in the air like a cloud of realization. This was no longer just an interview. It had become an unforgettable moment of quiet strength and dignity. The host's grip on control was slipping. The once mocking smirk on his face had slowly faded, replaced by a faint flicker of discomfort. He had expected Barron Trump to falter, to crack under the intense pressure of his words. What he didn't anticipate was the calm, measured response that had left everyone in the room questioning their assumptions. But it was in the moments after Barron's final words that the situation took an unexpected, almost surreal turn. For a brief moment, the room was utterly still. The energy in the studio had shifted completely. The audience, which had been eager to witness a confrontation, was now spellbound. The liberal journalist, whose career had been built on sharp provocations and exposing vulnerability, suddenly found himself cornered by a force he hadn't anticipated, the quiet, unwavering strength of a young man who refused to be manipulated. Barron's words reverberated in the air. It's easy to mock people. It's hard to understand them. But in the end, it's understanding that brings people together, not mockery. Each syllable was delivered with a kind of wisdom that far surpassed his years. The host, struggling to recover, launched into a half-hearted attempt at deflection. He fumbled for the next question, but it was clear that the balance of power had shifted. Barron, though still seated with an air of quiet dignity, now commanded the space. He had set the tone, and the room felt it. The tension had not dissipated. Instead, it had deepened into something more profound, respect. But Barron wasn't finished. The weight of the moment hung on him like an invisible force, pressing down on the host and the audience alike. As the camera's lens zoomed in on him, Barron's eyes flickered, a brief hint of vulnerability peeking through his otherwise calm exterior. The studio had become a stage, and Barron was performing an act of courage, one that no one could have predicted. With the eyes of the world upon him, Barron's final words pierced through the room. You may try to tear us apart. You may mock, criticize, and question every move we make. But no matter what happens, we'll remain a family. And that is something you'll never take away. His voice was steady, unwavering, each word carrying the weight of years spent in the shadow of public scrutiny. There was no anger, no retaliation, just a statement of truth that cut through the noise. The host, visibly rattled, stared back at Barron for a long, agonizing moment. It was as if the words had hit him in a place he wasn't ready to confront. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. Barron's response had not only silenced him, it had caused him to reconsider the very nature of the conversation they were having. And then, in a moment that seemed to stretch on forever, the host turned his gaze downward. The audience, holding its collective breath, watched as Barron Trump, with a maturity and composure that few could have predicted, had transformed the entire atmosphere of the show. What had started as a public mockery of his family had evolved into a moment of deep reflection for everyone in the room. The tension that had filled the air just moments ago had now given way to a sense of solemnity. The host's attempts at humor were no longer landing. The audience, once on edge, now found themselves questioning their own judgments, reconsidering their opinions about Barron Trump. The power had shifted not through anger, but through something far more powerful, a quiet, steadfast confidence that no one in the room had expected. It was in this moment that Barron had not only disarmed the journalist but had also won over the crowd. The power of understanding, dignity, and family had triumphed over mockery, proving that true strength often lies in restraint, not reaction. The host finally spoke, but the words were empty, hollow. "Well, I think that's all the time we have for today," he said, his voice betraying the fact that he knew the conversation had been lost. The camera lingered on Barron, who, with a slight nod, silently acknowledged the shift that had just occurred. The audience, still in awe, erupted in applause. Not for Barron's family or for his political ties, but for Barron himself. The young man who had shown the world that grace under fire could be more powerful than any rebuttal. The host, now visibly flustered, tried to salvage what was left of the show, but the moment had passed. In that brief, intense exchange, Barron Trump had not just survived the scrutiny, he had triumphed over it, turning what was meant to be a moment of mockery into a defining statement of quiet strength. As the camera zoomed out and the credits began to roll, it was clear. Barron Trump, despite his youth, had just delivered one of the most powerful responses the world had seen. He had proven, in the face of provocation, that wisdom, dignity, and family are worth more than any mockery or criticism. In that moment, Barron Trump had become not just the son of a former president, but a young man who had earned his own place in the public's respect. The studio lights began to dim as the final moments of the show played out. The applause that echoed through the room wasn't merely for Barron Trump's composure or for his family. It was for something far more profound: his unwavering ability to respond to mockery with grace, dignity, and maturity. What started as an uncomfortable moment for a teenager had, in the blink of an eye, become a pivotal lesson on the power of understanding and the strength of one's inner values. As Barron's figure slowly disappeared from the spotlight, the world outside the studio was left to contemplate the significance of the event. It wasn't just the words he spoke, but the way he spoke them, a quiet yet resounding testament to the strength that lies in restraint. In a society often driven by soundbites and sensationalism, Barron had given the world a lesson in holding one's ground without raising a voice. And for those watching, it was a lesson that could not be ignored. The host, once brimming with confidence and sharp commentary, had been reduced to nothing more than a figure in the background. His usual tactics of baiting and provoking had failed miserably. The audience, once expectant of drama, found themselves instead reflecting on a much deeper truth. Real strength is not about having the loudest voice or the sharpest tongue, it's about standing firm, with dignity, even when the world around you seeks to tear you down. Barron's words: "It's easy to mock people. It's hard to understand them. But in the end, it's understanding that brings people together, not mockery," hung in the air, leaving behind a sense of quiet empowerment. For those who had once viewed him with skepticism or as merely a figure in the background of a political dynasty, this moment had given them something far more important: respect. The simple truth that dignity triumphs over mockery, understanding over judgment, was one that resonated far beyond the walls of the studio. And in that silence, as the credits rolled, the world outside the screen was left with a feeling that could only be described as awakening. Barron had not only stood up for his family, he had stood up for the very principles of kindness, restraint, and understanding. He had set a new standard, not only for how we view public figures, but for how we conduct ourselves in the face of adversity. For anyone who watched that exchange, Barron had delivered more than just an answer to a question. He had offered a blueprint for how to navigate a world that is often quick to judge, quick to mock, and slow to understand. In the midst of a world that thrives on sensationalism, Barron Trump's ability to remain grounded and poised under pressure had become a reminder that true strength is born not from defiance, but from inner peace. As the audience applauded, one couldn't help but feel inspired. Barron had shown the world that no matter the noise, no matter the criticisms, staying true to oneself is the ultimate form of resistance. His response wasn't just a personal victory, it was a rallying cry for all of us to look beyond the surface, to seek understanding rather than quick judgment, and to always, above all, respond with dignity. In the end, Barron's actions had proven something crucial: that the most profound moments of growth often come in the quietest of moments. His strength wasn't in his ability to retaliate, it was in his decision not to. And that, perhaps, is the greatest lesson of all.